So, US President Donald Trump hosting the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a news conference which we were expecting was cancelled, but then this brief chat turned into an impromptu news conference. Always very difficult to predict, of course, the decisions of the president, but it turned into a lengthy question and answer session with reporters, as you can see there in the room, discussing everything from tariffs to Gaza, to nuclear talks with Iran. Very good evening. Welcome to The World with me, Jonathan Samuels. President Donald Trump has said tonight that Israel could be on its way to tariffs relief as he doubled down elsewhere, threatening even more levies on China as global markets continue deep losses. He's hosting the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the first leader to visit since the blanket global tariffs were announced. President Trump also announced that the US is to have direct nuclear talks with Iran. We'll get more on that in a moment. We'll go live to the White House and to Jerusalem. But let's begin with this report from US correspondent James Matthews.
Another day, another bell on the New York Stock Exchange, and smiles over substance. The real picture here, again, was jaw-dropping. Donald Trump had a Monday morning date with the LA Dodgers baseball team, World Series winners.
You did a big number.
As world markets fell yet further, the president wasn't for turning. In a Truth Social post, he threatened China that if it didn't withdraw its 34% retaliation tariffs, the United States will impose additional tariffs on China of 50%.
Will you do a 90-day pause? Would you consider that?
Or Bill, yeah, you know, I think that the president is going
Market volatility was writ large when this interview was written up as Donald Trump considering a 90-day pause on tariffs, only for the White House to dismiss it as fake news. In the markets, the picture brightened briefly. In this colour by numbers, the numbers coloured it red, then green, then red again. If that was the stock market as a spectator sport, so, in part, was this. Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu was the first world leader to visit the White House since the tariff announcement.
Mr. President, will you discuss tariffs on Israel?
For his country, it's 17%. What price a reduction?
We will eliminate the trade deficit with the United States. We intend to do it very quickly. We think it's the right thing to do. And we're going to also eliminate trade barriers, a variety of trade barriers that have been put up unnecessarily.
We've been ripped off and taken advantage of by many countries over the years, and can't do it anymore. Just can't do it anymore. Can't be the stupid people anymore.
In all of this, there are the politics. Republicans in Congress have voiced concern at where a Republican president is taking them. And Bill Ackman, a billionaire who helped to fund the Trump campaign, has called for a pause in tariffs, warning of what he calls a self-induced economic nuclear winter. And then there's the first buddy, Elon Musk, who has appeared to part ways with the presidential line.
But I think it comes from some minds in South America.
He posted this on X, having given an interview supporting a free trade zone between Europe and North America.
The operation of the free market is so essential, not only to promote productive efficiency, but even more, to foster harmony and peace among the peoples of the world.
I think we're doing a great job.
Donald Trump used this encounter to confirm he wasn't considering a pause in tariffs. For many, it is a hard reality over reassurance. James Matthews, Sky News, in Washington.
Well, our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle is in Jerusalem, live to him after we speak to Mark Stone at the White House. Mark, a day of turmoil then, and the president's clearly not backing down.
Yeah, just looking behind me because Prime Minister Netanyahu is due to leave shortly after a day curtailed. There was due to be a news conference in the East Room. Instead, we got just one slightly shorter news conference, still long, but only with a much smaller group of pooled media that were in the Oval Office. You saw all of it in the past hour. Much talk on Iran, which I know Ali will talk about in a moment. But on trade and on the extraordinary few days that we have seen globally with the economies of the world, I think the Israeli visit was kind of a test case for other countries to see what they might be able to achieve, because Netanyahu came here having had a 17% tariff whacked on all Israeli goods coming to the United States, which was not something he expected. A day before last Wednesday, Israel removed all tariffs from products, American products going into Israel. And so I think the expectation in Jerusalem was that that would mean that Israel would get a much better deal than 17% turned out to be. So we did get some, well, I guess clarity, but actually not really. I mean, I'm looking back at my notes here. There was an awful lot of discussion. Netanyahu spoke for about, 5% of the time. Donald Trump did almost all the talking. He said that many countries are negotiating with us. They are negotiating fair deals. Japan is coming. We want them to open up their country. He's talking to China. Remember today, he threatened tariffs of over 100% on China. And on the broad trade fight that he has picked with the entire world, he said it is an honor to do it. No one else has, and he dodged all questions about the stock market in America, about the impact for consumers domestically. He was asked about the mixed messages, because some in his administration have suggested that this is absolutely not a negotiation. The tariffs are there to stay, and yet he seems to suggest that it is absolutely a negotiation. He said both could be true. They could be permanent or they could be negotiations. Well, that's not very much help for diplomats anywhere. And specifically on the EU and tariffs, he said the EU was formed to do damage to us and to US trade. They are going to have to buy their energy from us, he said. And then he talked about America's clean, beautiful coal that he would like to sell around the world. There was a little bit of discussion about cars as well. I guess it's a really tangible way to understand what's going on here, because he would like, for example, American cars to be sold en masse across the European Union, across the UK, Japan, China, everywhere else. Now, take the UK and the EU. The reason that American cars are not sold in large numbers is partly because they're not very popular, because they're so huge. They're gas guzzling, they're much more expensive to run, but partly, frankly, because they are less safe. They do not meet European safety standards. So there is potentially an avenue there for countries like the UK, if they were to lower what are known as non-tariff barriers, so that's not tariffs, but other restrictions that prevent American goods from being sold around the world, in the UK and elsewhere. If those NTBs, as they're known, non-tariff barriers, were to be removed, which would lower safety standards in the countries that these products are going to, then potentially that could open up an avenue where Trump would lower the tariffs that he's put in place on those countries. So you could see avenues where negotiations can be done, potentially, but it is costly for other countries, politically and economically as well. So I guess a news conference where he said an awful lot, but he didn't really give any clarity on whether or not countries can lower the levies that America has placed on it. And really interestingly, Jonathan, at the end of the news conference, after Prime Minister Netanyahu effectively said, look, we've removed all tariffs, you can sell as much American product to us tariff-free as you like, you might assume that Trump would then say, well, that is why we've removed levies, the 17% levy. He didn't say that. He said it might be there to stay. So much confusion, I imagine, whether you're an economist in any country around the world.
OK, Mark in Washington, thank you for the moment. And Alistair is in Jerusalem. Alistair, the situation in Gaza discussed. The president saying he expects the war to end in the not-too-distant future. But it was his comments on Iran, wasn't it, which were particularly fascinating?
Yeah, I mean, you can pick out so much from a Donald Trump press conference. I think, he was speaking about the war in Gaza and then 30 seconds later talking about the price of eggs. But it was what he had to reveal about direct talks taking place between the United States and Iran this Saturday that, for many will be the headline out of that, certainly here in the Middle East, certainly for the Israelis. He wouldn't say where those talks are taking place. My money, for what it's worth, perhaps on Oman, if not somewhere possibly in Europe, and he wouldn't say who is taking part in the talks, as in which officials, other than to say that at the very highest, almost at the very highest level, so obviously not leader to leader, perhaps foreign minister to foreign minister, Argacci to Marco Rubio. We'll have to wait and see. But the fact that Iran and the United States are going to sit down in direct talks and not through a third-party mediator is very significant, because although since Trump had come back into the White House there was efforts to try and get negotiations underway, it didn't seem as though they were quite at that position. Now, I also suspect we now know the reason why the Israelis were summoned at sort of rather short notice to Washington, and that would probably to tell them face to face, but to talk to them about it. I don't think this will sit that comfortably with Netanyahu. You know, he had a very difficult relationship with the Obama administration when nuclear talks took place some years back. I think he has a far better relationship with this Trump government, and he'll probably have more faith in the Trump government trying to pursue the sort of deal that would be in Israel's favour. Netanyahu, you remember, thought that the previous Iranian nuclear deal was one of the world's worst deals. But they will be nervous that the Americans are going ahead with this. Obviously, the Israelis won't have a seat at the table. But, you know, Trump effectively putting a bit of a countdown clock on the potential for military action against Iran. He was asked what would happen if Iran didn't agree to a deal, or if a deal was not negotiated. And he said, I think Iran is going to be in very great danger. I mean, he did make the point that nobody wants to see a war with Iran, but clearly not taking military action off the table either. Just very quickly going over some of the other things that were discussed, because there was a lot discussed. Gaza, again, sort of loose language on the possibility of a deal very soon without giving any substance to it. There was, I mean, Netanyahu sort of sat there for a lot of it, not really saying much at all beyond his opening statement. I think he was kind of playing the game that a lot of world leaders we've seen now play at the White House, sort of nod along, laugh at the right points, don't say too much, try and escape from it, you know, with the relationships sort of still intact. There were a few awkward moments, I thought, between the two of them when Trump was talking about his relationship with President Erdogan and Turkey, and sort of saying to Netanyahu, you know, don't pick a fight with Turkey, particularly over Syria. Obviously, Mark has spoken about tariffs as well. Israelis not happy that 17% was whacked on them, but clearly not really getting any much movement in that. You know, the two men both spoke about a free choice for Palestinians to leave Gaza, clearly both trying to pursue this policy of emptying Gaza of Palestinians. You know, how much of a free choice is it really after 18 months of conflict when most of the Gaza Strip is entirely flattened? That is not, you know, I think most Palestinians, most Gazans will tell you that if they do decide to leave, it wouldn't be, you know, out of free choice. It'll be because they feel that they've got no other choice. And so, you know, very wide-ranging. Obviously, a lot of it focused on the Middle East. But as I say, it was that announcement about direct talks with Iran that will capture the headlines.
OK, Alistair in Jerusalem, thank you. Well, for Donald Trump, the mission and message are simple. His tariffs are medicine and he's not backing down. But with stock markets sinking and swinging wildly around the world, the question is increasingly becoming, is this an overdose? Well, on Wall Street, the Dow Jones has just closed down 349 points, or just under 1%. There was a short-lived rally when it was wrongly thought that tariffs would be put on hold. On the contrary, the president has threatened China with more. On Asian markets, Hong Kong stocks plunged 13%, their biggest drop since the Asian financial crisis of 1997. Japan finished 8% lower. UK, French and German stocks tumbled too, all closing down about 4 or 5%. And EU trade ministers are mulling over how to hit back.
Clear that we are open for negotiations and that in parallel we are preparing a potential list for retaliation and other measures for retaliation if this is necessary. We prefer to have a negotiated solution.
Well, the ups and downs of markets in turmoil bring plenty of anxiety, but also confusion, of course. Business and economics correspondent Gurpreet Narwan explains more about what's driving the turmoil with help from a fear index.
The warning signs are flashing red. Stocks are in freefall. Money is pouring into safe havens instead. Traders navigating markets thrown into turmoil by a volatile US president.
We have a predictably unpredictable leader of the free world who announced he was going to do something that everybody was expecting, but he did it in a way that upset the global world order. It was indiscriminate, it was wide-ranging. So what does that cause? Massive uncertainty. And when you get massive uncertainty, you get a markdown in prices. And you see this huge fall in indices.
And this is what massive uncertainty looks like. This is Wall Street's VIX index, also known as the fear gauge. It measures how much traders are willing to pay for insurance against price swings. It tells us how much volatility they're expecting in the US stock market over the next 30 days. And things, well, they haven't been this volatile since the pandemic back in 2020, and before that, the financial crisis of 2008, and both of them were followed by recessions. So more volatility to come, as if we haven't had enough of that already. Donald Trump announced his sweeping tariffs policy last Wednesday, and whatever cautious optimism traders may have had was swiftly shattered. Stock markets across the world plummeted. And after a brief respite over the weekend, well, they're still falling. Here in London, the FTSE 100 in the blue, that was down 4.38% today, while Germany's DAX in the yellow fell 4.26%. And Asian markets fared even worse. China's Shanghai Composite Index lost 7% on Monday, its worst day in 5 years. And this shows us how things have moved since Trump was elected. But let's set it all in a wider context. For the FTSE 100, we have seen bigger falls than this. Black Monday back in 1987 being the big one, but it does rank among them. And things haven't even bottomed out yet. In fact, they could still get worse.
The really, really bad scenarios of a full-blown global trade war with multiple retaliation is not priced by markets currently. The FTSE 100 is only 5% lower than it was on January the 1st. That's not the sort of stock market fall you would expect to see in a full-blown trade war.
Trump's first presidency gave us a president who cared about the success of stock markets. Well, those very markets have given his tariff policy a clear vote of no confidence. And still, he's not backing down. For Trump, this is the storm before the calm. He says he is willing to weather it to the very end. But markets are hoping he might still change course.
Well, let's get the thoughts now of the economist David Rosenberg, founder and president of Rosenberg Research and Associates. Great to have you on the programme this evening. Thanks very much for your time, and perfect timing as well, because you can give me your reaction to what we just heard from President Trump when it comes to tariffs.
Well, I guess we could all be a little surprised that over the extent, the magnitude of the trade actions that he's taking. But we've all known since the mid-1980s that President Trump has always viewed trade surpluses that other countries run against the United States as being part of rip-off artists and cheaters, and that the U.S. is just giving a huge subsidy to the rest of the world. It tells me, actually, that the White House, to the highest level, doesn't really understand how the balance of payments really works. But I'd say that it's, we all knew that he was going to do what he did in Trump 1.0, which is make trade a priority. But back then it was more targeted and it was really largely aimed at China. And China is, economic enemy number one to the United States. But in any event, I think it's just the actual shock of the numbers last week at the Rose Garden that the U.S. all of a sudden has gone from a 2.5% tariff with the rest of the world to 25%. That's a tenfold increase, and that's a huge shock. So it's more the magnitude than just the concept of, putting added tariffs on other countries.
And in terms of what we've just heard, given the turmoil of today, we didn't get much more clarity, did we? He was seeming to suggest that countries are welcome to come to the White House, as Benjamin Netanyahu has done. They're welcome to come and talk to him. But also he's doubling down. And even when it comes to Israel itself, Israel's saying 0% tariffs where we're concerned. Donald Trump certainly refusing to say those 17% tariffs are going anywhere.
Well, I think you got to classify Israel as almost a special situation because Bibi needs Donald Trump right now for a whole bunch of other things, including its war against Hamas. So there's other things going on there. But the first thing I'll say is that, you had these massive gyrations today. I guess, we closed down 349 points in the Dow. I guess we reached a situation in our lives where down 349 points is actually a quiet day. But the major point is that we are in a bog of uncertainty. Donald Trump laid down the cards last week at the Rose Garden. And I think that anybody who believes, and of course we had a bit of a microcosm today of what could happen if he were to backtrack on these humongous tariffs, and the market just absolutely surged until it was said that that there was fake news, that the White House really didn't come out with a 90-day reprieve. You can see just how much on tenterhooks investors are. But if you believe that President Trump is going to walk away from these tariff increases that he's announced, I just don't think that you're paying attention. I don't think that there's any negotiation that's going to cause them to back off. And it's one thing for Israel, a small country, to move towards a balance on trade with the United States. Other countries are going to find it much more difficult. And so I think that we're this bog of uncertainty that we're in that's undermining the markets. Yeah. That's not going away anytime soon. And for people that are believing that there's going to be some sort of reprieve, I don't think that's going to happen. That's a fundamental misunderstanding of Donald Trump's view on trade surpluses. Use them as subsidies. Sorry?
Yeah. I was just going to say, I mean, you're absolutely right about the markets jumping around today with the sort of mixed messages. And of course, the one thing the markets hate is uncertainty. And it seems things are changing constantly. Just a final question, really. Do you think we could get to a situation where countries who are hit really badly sort of gang up together, form some sort of united front to try and fight this?
I don't think that you're going to find individual countries ganging up on the U.S. And there's always a risk that he's just going to come and hit you even harder. China's already hit back. China has muscle, and he's already hit back once again on China. We haven't heard from the EU yet. The EU can hit hard. I mean, you're talking about a collection of countries. The EU is a collection of countries as an economic unit. They're as big as the United States. And they could hit back a lot on services. So I don't think you're going to find a whole bunch of different countries banding together. But, we already saw Canada hit back. Mexico is biding its time. The EU is biding its time. I mean, we're still going to write multiple chapters of this. I think that we are tiptoeing our way into a global trade war of the likes that we haven't had in our hands since the 1930s. And hopefully that's not going to prove to be 100% the template. But the reality is that this is the first global trade war. The White House has just done a full assault on a $33 trillion beast, bigger than the U.S. economy even, otherwise known as global trade, $33 trillion. And when you think of how globally intertwined the world economy is and global supply chains, we saw that in COVID, how that can absolutely wreak havoc on economies around the world. Well, this is the sort of thing that we're talking about. And I don't think Donald Trump is going to walk away from it because he is philosophically opposed, not to tariffs. This is about tariffs. He is philosophically opposed to any country in the world running a bilateral trade surplus against the United States. And that is going to cause a major upheaval. And when you think about it, this story is not even a week old yet. It's just getting started.
Indeed, and I'm sure in coming weeks we will get you back on to talk about the latest ramifications. David Rosenberg from Rosenberg Research and Associates, always good to get your analysis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, the Israeli military today moved to explain more about why its troops fired on aid and emergency workers in Gaza, killing 15 of them. The IDF says an initial investigation shows the soldiers sensed a threat. The army earlier claimed its forces were confronted by unmarked vehicles in the dark, but changed its account when video showed ambulances with their lights on. The Palestine Red Crescent is demanding an independent investigation. A warning, Alistair Bunkle's report contains video of the moment the convoy was attacked.
This video that emerged over the weekend of a convoy of ambulances with their emergency lights on has raised serious questions about why the Israeli military opened fire on it, killing 15 medics and aid workers. It has proven that Israel's initial explanation was false, but there are many more questions still unanswered.
The lights were on. Why they were killed? Why did you destroy the ambulances after killing them? Why did you try to dig deep and hide the ambulances? Why did you hide the bodies? Why and why? They have to answer for that.
Today, the Palestinian Red Crescent released the full 17-minute video of the convoy before it was ambushed by the IDF. Sky News has analysed the video and plotted the route they took. It shows them driving north out of Rafah towards the point the ambulance was last seen. At one point, one of the vehicles is lost and stops to ask another for help.
ما شفتش السيارة. الله أكبر. ما شفناهاش. ما شفناهاش. ما شفت السيارة. جيت مسفح لك يا راجل. وين أبو يوسف صالح؟ صالح السيارة ورا؟ يا راجل. استنى بدنا نستنى كمان سيارات.
They then drive back south until they see the ambulance. This route and the exchanges in the video seem to be further corroboration that the convoy was on a journey to find missing colleagues, not a Hamas unit looking for Israeli soldiers to attack. Today, the Israeli government spoke publicly for the first time about the incident. A spokesman was asked twice by Sky News if there was any proof that some of the medics were affiliated with Hamas, as claimed. The Israeli spokesman refused to answer directly.
The reason why this is an issue is because again and again, Hamas and other terrorist organizations have misused the emergency services. They've used them as their own arm. They've ferried their own terrorists inside, away from, to try and escape from Israel.
It is not Hamas who have claimed that the 15 dead were medics. It is the United Nations and the Red Crescent Emergency Service. Tonight, a preliminary finding by the IDF said that the soldiers opened fire because of a perceived threat following an earlier encounter with Hamas fighters. The full IDF investigation is expected to report in the coming days. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News in Jerusalem.
Well, I'm joined now by Jagan Chapagan, Secretary-General of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, speaking for the first time since this awful incident. Thank you very much for your time. It's really appreciated. Just take me back to the moment you first heard about these 15 killings. What went through your mind?
As you know, these medics were... we hadn't heard the news of them for more than a week when they had gone for rescuing their friends. And of course, there was a very long wait, agonizing wait, because there was no news. And of course, the worst fears were in our minds when we hadn't heard for about a week. And then when the news came, of course, it was while we are hearing that the worst of the worst might be coming, but it was still horrifying to hear the news of the people who had gone there to rescue the lost colleagues. There was absolutely no other intention than the humanitarian intention behind the ambulance going to that area. So when people are going there for a purely humanitarian purpose and they lose their life on the way, it's really horrifying.
You heard in that report there what the IDF are saying today, that the preliminary inquiry indicated that the troops opened fire due to what was a perceived threat following a previous encounter in the area, and that 6 of the individuals killed have been identified by them as Hamas terrorists. What do you make of that explanation?
You know, the Palestinian Red Crescent, they have a long history of providing emergency medical services in both West Bank and Gaza. They are humanitarian organizations. Their emergency medical workers, the volunteers, are well trained to follow the humanitarian principles that we absolutely value, the principles of neutrality and impartiality. And I think all the accounts suggest that they were there for a purely humanitarian purpose and no other purpose. So I think it's really, really important that there is an independent investigation to look into actually what happened so that the truth comes out. I'm sure that all sides to the conflict would want to know the truth. And I think we do want to know the truth. So I think allowing for an independent investigation to go and look into it without emotions, but with absolute focus to find out the truth, I think that will do a huge service, not only for this particular incident. You know, Jonathan, this incident is happening in many parts of the world. And as you know, the last year was the worst year for the humanitarians, more than 382 humanitarian workers being killed. So when we don't find the truth, when these horrific things happen, the impunity sort of continues. I wrote an article in The Guardian, and that's where I argued that impunity in one place breeds impunity in every place. So it's extremely important to find the truth. And I think that will only do a good for everyone.
Of course. And when you hear the accusation, which we hear a lot, don't we, that Hamas militants are using the likes of your organisation to hide behind, can you say that that never happens, hand on heart? Can you say that there were no Hamas militants in that group of 15?
I think the ambulances with the Palestinian Red Crescent volunteers and medics were there. They were not Hamas actors, that I can say with absolute certainty.
And you say that you're wanting an independent investigation. Does that mean you don't have any faith in the Israeli investigation, that they will come to the truth?
I think what is really important, Jonathan, here is that when there is this degree of mistrust that happens in a conflict situation like this one, and you know the accounts get challenged by one party and the other parties, I think it would be really good to have independent people coming and looking at it with full objectivity. That will only give the full credibility to what happens. And I think when people trust the outcomes of an investigation, that will help in some small way to move forward.
Will these 15 get justice, do you think?
You know, the issue here, Jonathan, I think we need to look at it is we have seen the erosion on the respect for international humanitarian law in many parts of the world in the last few years. We have 280 humanitarians killed in 2023, 382 killed last year, and this year we have already seen, this year would probably be the worst than previous years. When this happens, it's extremely important that the truth is found and the perpetrators are subjected to right consequences. But here, I would also like to emphasize that as we are seeing these incidents increasing in different parts of the world, also, particularly the governments, because they have a responsibility under the international humanitarian law to respect the organizations like the Red Cross, Red Crescent, or Red Crescent emblems. When somebody wears them, or when a vehicle wears them, they must be protected. And when that doesn't happen, I think the government needs to put pressure on their peers, on their friends, particularly. If you are friends to a particular government or particular party to the conflict, I think it's extremely important to do that advocacy and put pressure so these things actually don't happen. Yeah. So we are really looking for the truth at the moment, but equally importantly, that globally upholding the international humanitarian law becomes a priority, and the states will have to lead.
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying when you say neutrality is the heart of everything you do and you have to remain impartial. Jagan Chap, again, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
You're watching The World with me, Jonathan Samuels. Coming up next was a Venezuelan man deported from the US, targeted for his tattoos. We speak to his family.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club.
4 more years!
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Hello again, welcome back. The family of a Venezuelan man who was deported from the US has told Sky News he was targeted because of his tattoos. Hundreds of Venezuelans have been accused of being gang members and sent to prison in El Salvador without due process under Donald Trump's sweeping crackdown on immigration. Our US correspondent Martha Kellner has more.
Until 5 weeks ago, Arturo Suarez was a professional singer performing in the US while seeking asylum from his native Venezuela. He followed the legal process to enter, but while recording a music video last month, he was arrested. It's believed he's one of over 200 men deported, not to their home country, but to this notorious El Salvador prison. It's part of President Trump's anti-immigration showpiece.
So you believe that Arturo is on this picture? You think he's this guy?
Yes.
That must
This
be...
is my bro.
That must be very sad to see.
Yeah.
Arturo's brother Nelson believes this is him, bound by his hands and feet, head shaved. The White House says Arturo is a gang member, but they've not provided any evidence to support this.
This is my brother. It's crazy. It's horrible.
Nelson says his brother's only crime is being Venezuelan and having tattoos.
Aproximadamente 33.
33 tattoos?
33 tattoos. Pero...
He liked tattoos?
No represent ganga 30 agua.
It wasn't the gangs?
No.
A hummingbird tattoo in memory of his late mother, a piano and verses from the Bible. Nelson believes this is what landed his brother in prison.
Policía Nacional de Colombia.
He shows me letters from the authorities in Colombia, Chile and Venezuela, stating Arturo has no criminal record in any of the countries he's lived in. Nelson is in America also claiming asylum. He worries about being deported too, and for his brother's safety.
We don't know what conditions he is in, if he has been mistreated, if his rights are being violated.
The men deported on planes to El Salvador were seemingly denied due process. President Trump is defying the judiciary at every turn. Other families say their loved ones were targeted for their tattoos too. Herthe Reyes had a Real Madrid badge with rosary beads, the White House says a gang symbol. And this 31-year-old makeup artist had tattoos on his wrist reading Mum and Dad, both men now in the El Salvador mega prison. The Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem visited too.
Do not come to our country illegally.
Posing in front of inmates.
How did you feel seeing Kristi Noem doing a photo shoot in that prison, knowing that your brother is probably there?
I feel bad, horrible, because in those images we only see criminals. With my brother, I feel like it's more a political issue. They needed numbers. They said these are the numbers. And now let's throw them to the lions.
The Trump administration has now admitted it sent at least one man to the El Salvador prison by mistake, calling it an administrative error. Incredibly, the government also now says it lacks the power to order his return. I contacted the White House to ask about Arturo's case and the other men sent to this prison for ambiguous reasons and without any court hearing. They didn't respond. Nelson's questions about why his brother was taken from him and thrown in prison are still unanswered. Martha Kellner, Sky News.
Just taking you back to Washington, these pictures from the last few moments. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been meeting with President Donald Trump, becoming the first foreign leader to visit Trump since he unleashed those tariffs on countries around the world. Benjamin Netanyahu leaving the White House, as I say, in the last few minutes. Whether his visit succeeds, of course, in bringing down or even eliminating Israel's tariffs remains to be seen. But, of course, how those discussions go could help set the stage for how other world leaders try and address the tariffs on their countries. Also revealed that talks with Iran are underway. So Benjamin Netanyahu leaving the White House after meeting President Trump. Now, to an initiative called the Reckoning Project. It aims to deploy on-the-ground investigative journalists who collect testimony from the sites of war crimes and atrocities, together with lawyers, with the aim of seeking accountability for alleged perpetrators. Well, the organisation's chief executive, Janine Di Giovanni, has been a war reporter for 3 decades, covering conflicts from the Rwandan genocide to Chechnya, Afghanistan, and more recently, Ukraine. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. And it's a fascinating idea. How do you train war reporters, journalists in conflict zones to gather the right evidence and to gather it in a way that could be eventually used in a trial?
Well, it is used in trial. What we do, basically, we started a few days after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and we only use Ukrainians for capacity building. We recruited investigative journalists, but also lawyers, social workers. They're very good at doing interviews. We train them how to take testimonies that will be admissible in court and will not contaminate evidence. So for instance, there's very strict protocol that you have to use if you're interviewing survivors of sexual violence or if you're interviewing children, and you cannot ever interview people who are traumatized because the prosecutors won't use it. So what happens is we spread out throughout the country, throughout Ukraine, and we basically take the testimonies and then we verify them using OSINT, open source intelligence. And then we work with the prosecutor general in Ukraine, in Kyiv. We're inside their government, and we build cases. So for instance, they will ask us, we need 8 incidents that happened in Kherson region involving torture or involving deported children, and we produce that. So far, we have more than 500 testimonies in our archive. We've submitted multiple submissions to the United Nations treaties. We have opened our own universal jurisdiction on torture in Argentina, citing Russian individuals for torture of Ukrainian civilians. So in a sense, what we do is a way of hastening justice, because having gone through so many wars, 3 genocides, Srebrenica, Rwanda, and the Yazidi slaughter, I saw that it took so long for perpetrators to get to The Hague, if they ever did. And a lot of this was because evidence was not being captured whilst wars were ongoing. So
I was just going to say, Janine, I know you've been to Ukraine, and we know there have been some terrible incidents there. I'm thinking from the early days, like Bucha, for example. What worried you the most when you visited and witnessed what was going on?
Well, Bucha was 3 years ago, March 31st, so we just had the terrible commemoration of 3 years. What happened is when the Russians occupied Ukraine, they got very far, close to Kyiv. Bucha is basically a suburb outside of Kyiv, a kind of bedroom community. But the Russians, when they retreated, they basically went crazy, and they executed civilians. They pulled them out onto the street. There was torture, there was mutilation. So we were on the ground very quickly in the aftermath, getting testimonies from survivors. Some of them, you know, there were one woman I talked to, her husband was just taken out onto the street, summarily executed. Another woman's son was taken out, mutilated. There were cellars that were used for torture chambers. There were mass graves. In total, there were more than 450 people who were killed. So basically, the Russian army ran wild. One thing that the Reckoning Project we've been working on for 3 years now is the deported Ukrainian kids. There are 19,000 Ukrainian children that were basically taken from their mainly special needs homes, but orphanages and schools. As soon as the Russians occupied, they would basically pull up buses, take the kids, bring them to Russia, where they're being forcibly adopted. And in many cases, indoctrinated with Russian propaganda. So they can't speak Ukrainian, they lose their Ukrainian names, they're being taught not Ukrainian history, but Russian history. And for young boys, they are being basically indoctrinated into the military. So
yeah, it's just awful, Janine. And listen, we've only got about 30 seconds left, so very briefly, if you would. One issue, of course, in Gaza is that international journalists aren't allowed in, so can't document this sort of evidence.
Well, I've worked in Gaza since 1990, so it's very painful to see what's happening. What I have to say is the incredibly brave journalists that are working there, and as you know, they're being killed one by one by one because they are taking evidence. They are bearing witness. Very similar to the white helmets in Syria. They were also targeted because they could be witnesses. So what we have now are the Gazan journalists who are dying in huge numbers, 263 of them, knowing that they're going to be killed, but they still keep on working courageously.
Janine, it's very kind of you to come on and explain more about the Reckoning Project. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's it for The World Tonight. I'll be here with news at 10 in a couple of minutes.